Welcome to another episode of the Svarim Chatter podcast. I'm Nachi Weinstein. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Mosaica Press. Check out their many new titles, including Becoming Godly. What does it mean to truly grow? The newly released Becoming Godly by Rabbi Dr. Yosef Sokol takes you on a transformative journey, blending timeless Torah wisdom with modern psychology to help you create a more meaningful, purpose-driven life. With beautiful haskamos from his Rebbe Rav Aaron Lapiansky and Rav Elya Brudny, this powerful work draws deeply from the teachings of the Ramchal and other Sifrei Machshava. Dr. Sokol also introduces his pioneering therapy model, Continuous Identity Cognitive Therapy, CI-CT, offering a unique approach to self-creation and personal growth. By integrating Torah insights with psychological principles, Becoming Godly explores how refining our choices and aligning with divine wisdom leads to true personal transformation. The book is structured around core principles: understanding the self, living with intention through Torah, embracing communal responsibility, and emulating Hashem's attributes in daily life. Whether you're navigating major life transitions or simply striving for a deeper connection to your purpose, this book offers a powerful roadmap to self-perfection. Available now from Mosaica Press. Get your copy today and use code CHATTER. That's CHATTER for 15% off. Visit mosaicapress.com to order. That's MOSAICAPRESS.com. And there's a link and information in the show's notes. And by the way, that code CHATTER works for all Mosaica Press titles. You can get 15% off. A note as it pertains to this episode is that the Memory Torah Palace that we discussed, so we've highlighted mainly the one on Masechta Megillah. It actually will now be available in a book format, and there'll be a link along with the other links and PDF and video and all that information in the show's notes, so do check that out. To sponsor an episode or to support the podcast, please email me svarimchatter@gmail.com, and you can find the link and information in the show's notes. You can also find a link to the Svarim Chatter WhatsApp community where I post new books, new Svarim, book deals, and so on. And of course, please subscribe and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen, Apple, Spotify, 24/6. And with that, enjoy this episode. Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined by Heshy Weisz, who is the founder of Torah Memory Palace, or Arman HaTorah, which is a memorization technique program based on the Gemara. And we're going to discuss that. We'll discuss some other things regarding memorization, remembering things, and specifically Gemara. So thank you, Heshy, for joining me.
Shalom Reb Nachi, thank you for having me. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to my little brother David. This was his idea. Always full of great ideas. Thank you, David. And should I tell you a little bit about my background?
You're familiar with the podcast. You know the first question that's coming. Yeah, so tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
Okay, great. So I grew up in Borough Park. I went to a pretty standard yeshiva path. I started out at Chassan Sefer. I went to Riverdale. I was in Riverdale for 5 years, and I went to Brisk. I was by Rav Yeshua, and then I went out. I got married. I went to BMG. I was in Kollel for 10 or 11 years. And the time came to go to work. I went to law school, and which opened up this whole memory track, so to speak. But not only just back up to my yeshiva years, I always felt while I was in yeshiva is that my Achilles heel, so to speak, was memory. Meaning I felt that, I was okay. My analysis was okay. I was able to chap the sugya, but I always felt that there was a hole, like that in memory, where I found that there are certain people that had a koyach to remember, like if you're talking about working memory, a long-term memory, they're able to remember a lot of information, and it always helps your analysis as well. If you have a lot of information handy, help you. And that was always sort of like a hole, like I felt something was missing. But and that goes even for and I had a certain drive to always to know a lot, but and in spite of that, I felt like it was a struggle, so to speak. Meaning, even when I was in Riverdale, where people did not focus on Bekiyas, I did have a special emphasis on Bekiyas. Maybe because it was a weakness of mine. I would at night I would learn side Masechtas and Chazer, but always somehow it just didn't click. And then when I was in Kollel, I had certain Masechtas I learned over and over and over, and which I knew pretty well, but wouldn't have it on my fingertips. So let's just jump forward, get into memory techniques. When I decided to go to law school, for better or worse, I once I spent you have to take an LSAT, which is an LSAT, which Nachi you're familiar with as well.
Did you do fish?
I did not use fish. That was before Fish's times. It was in 2010. It probably would have been helpful, but then when I started reading up more and more about law school, because I realized that law school is different than yeshiva. Because one big thing, anyone that goes to law school knows that if you want to get a good job out of law school, you have to do really, really well. Especially if you're not going into one of the top tier law schools. I went to good law school, Rutgers Law School, but not. And you have to
not Ivy League,
not Ivy League. Right? So in order, if you want to get into a big law firm, which I did want to do. You have to really finish top of your class, and in law school, the way the system works is you're tested at the end of a semester on everything you learned that semester. So basically, there's no testing throughout the semester. By the time you get to the end of the semester, just one test. You sit down, close book. Basically, the professor gives you a fact pattern, and you have to throw everything you know with a reasonable analysis onto that piece of paper. And I was like, how am I going to do this? And then the bar, and like, this is my biggest weakness, and here I am trying to perform. So I decided, let me look if there's something I can do about memory. And at that, I found out about then I did read a couple of memory books, and then I did find something called the School of Phenomenal Memory, which is by some Russian. It's a Russian memory, a memory, whatever you call this guy, a memory guru, what to say, and he has a system of memory which is based on a system that's very similar to a sefer that's laid out in a sefer by Reimagined, Leva Aryeh, which and it's called Memory Palace. There are a few names to this memory system. It could be called Memory Palace. There's Method of Loki, which it's the same technique. Memory Palace is the concept is simple and straightforward. It uses something called spatial memory, which basically means that you could very easily remember things that you see and where they are. For example, if you go to a brand new supermarket in Lakewood, right? They open up every couple of months. There's a new one. If you go in once or twice into that supermarket, chances are you come home, you could go back there in your mind and you'll know what the basic layout of that supermarket is. Okay, the fruits were towards the right, the meat section was over there on the left, the freezers are back in the back, the cashiers are here. Because you saw it, you could see it if you go to an electronics store, you go to some kind of park with your kids, you have a basic idea, even though you saw it one time. And that's tons of information, right? That's a lot of information. So you see, but because you saw it, you could sort of recreate that image in your mind. Right now, so the method of Loki is what they used to call as hooks. The idea is to take anything you want to remember, any piece of data that's important to you, encode that into an image, right? Make that into an image, and you put that image into a hook in the place, right? So let's use like right here, Nachi, you have a beautiful study over here. Let's say in this study, you would decide you want to use this for your palace, right? You want to use this for your base to remember, let's say, a shopping list, right? Or you want to remember a couple of things, right? So you'll use a couple of different areas in this library. Like, for example, on this wall, you'll say like that Svarim Shank on the left is my first base, in the center is the second base, and then towards the far right is your third base, right? You would put one item that your wife asked you to get on the left, and you'll stick it right there. The other item you'll put in the center, and the third item you put on the right. And the idea is, later when you go to the store, in your mind, you go back to your library, you look back, oh, what did I have there? And sort of that reaction comes back, and it triggers the memory, and it comes back to you in a very organized way. Space, that's where it is. That's in a nutshell, a very simplified explanation of the method, of the Memory Palace method.
Yeah, and you mentioned Peter Arimada. We'll get into him here in a minute. I think it's worth discussing him and Sefer Lev Aryeh before we come back to your method and the Torah Memory Palace and what you're doing. You added the word Torah into you're talking about Memory Palace. It's interesting. You talk about law school just a second. Personally, and for any of those lawyers, I know there's quite a number of lawyers or people that are familiar with law school that listen to the podcast. Law school, exactly. It took me. I think after the first semester, I realized the whole semester people outline. I don't need to come to the end of the semester. Just each you try to get exam over a couple of days, and I would just space them out, and then spend, the 2 days before this exam just cramming everything for con law, and then spend 3 days just for whatever it was, like everything, tax, whatever it was, just spend those, and then boom, you just like cram your head from morning to night, and then boom, you come in there, and it's like the memory, everything's just stuck in your head. That's what it was for me. And for the bar, it was just like, I had the same anxiety the whole time. My anxiety from going to law school, saying the podcast, was just like the bar exam. I was like, oh my goodness. My mother's a lawyer. It was always like, I was always thinking my whole life, like, oh, the bar exam, how do you do the bar exam? It's like, you go to law school and then you get to the bar exam, and the bar exam, it's bad, but it's like you sit and you just cram in the information. And right, just for me, it was simplifying everything. And it wasn't memory, it was simplifying. If you try to make it too complex and you try to retain too much information, then I feel like you lose it because it's too much. I'm sure we'll get to that. We try to make simplified, you simplify the information, you end up retaining more, personally. But anyways, that was with law school. Now, so Levi Aryeh, B'Hudari Madana. So we're not going to sit and redo his biography on the podcast. A fascinating individual, but 1571, 1648, thereabouts. Italy. He's actually not from Modena. His family is. He's from Venice. He's a Venetian rabbi. Famous. There's a famous autobiography published by Princeton. Published by Princeton. It was by him. Chai Yehuda, but the English translation, the autobiography of a 17th century Venetian rabbi, Leon Modena's Life of Judah, which is well worth reading. If everyone not familiar, you can read about him, and you can read about all his. He wrote many Sfarim. He has Drushes, Midbar Yehuda, and he has Levi Aryeh, we're going to get into now. He has Tshuva, which was just printed. He has many things. And Shirley Bornstein did a raid recently on his sefer about gambling, and in his autobiography, he talks about he was an addicted gambler. And again, I did a podcast with Professor Edelman a number of years ago for those interested in hearing more about his full biography. But Levi Aryeh actually didn't discuss. So, we were talking before, and I was like, this is a great opportunity to really discuss Levi Aryeh and these memory techniques. Levi Aryeh is a sefer that Yehuda Madana wrote, and he wrote about that you should be able to remember things. And just, to read some and to paraphrase some. I don't want to read too much text on the podcast. And he talks about why he wrote it. And also in the back, he also has a very short Taryag mitzvahs, like one-liners for each mitzvah, very short, so only one word just to remember the mitzvahs. But some of the things that he says in the sefer, he talks about why he wrote the sefer, and he talks about that in his opinion there's nobody in the world that doesn't want to remember, he wants to remember things. This memory is very, very important, like he was saying. Heshy, you have to remember things. It's very important for everything. And he says, and Befrat, especially for Talmidei Chachamim, you have to remember the Torah, you have to remember the Psak, you have to remember to learn you're learning. You have to remember, he says, if you want to be a Pesach, you want to be a Darshan, you mamash have to remember. He said, it's like bread. You got to remember. And, what does it help if you have a great svara and yalam and you can't remember anything? You can't remember. What are you talking about? He says you have to remember. He quotes the mission of it. Parakeh Mission Yud Beis. This is one of the things that he goes on about. So, a couple of things that he says interesting. Just there's much more there. It's fascinating to read. The first chapter actually was translated into English, the Posen Library, and so there's I'll link in the show's notes to that translation. You can read the English translation of the first chapter. But when he continues in his second chapter, he goes in second parak. He talks about that. Brings from the Torah that it's important to remember. And he says the Torah talks about it. It says, Zochar es asher osa, Zochar es yom hazeh, Zochar es yom ha-Shabbos, Zachatem es kol mitzvos Hashem. And the Nevi'im says, Zichru Torah es Moshe Avdi. It says, Schira is something that's totally in Kima Torah. It's all over the Torah. And he says, we will find all the time that Hashem is giving Musar, right? Hashem lechapen tishkach, v'shachach Hashem lekecho, v'tishkach el-mechelecha, kishachachta. And he goes on. And it goes all through Nevi'im. He keeps going on. And he says, you see, you can't forget. And then he says that Rishonim ask, how does the Torah command us something that's not possible? Don't forget. I forget. I'm a human being. I forget. Says right. That's what happens. And he says you have to remember. He goes to Gemara, and he goes on. He basically walks through Chazal, showing that you have to know, you have to work on it, and you have to really work through remembering. He actually quotes, and then in the third part, goes through the Efaidi. A philosopher, one of the Rishonim, and he talks about different things. He says, Bekitzer, different things, they're fascinating to remember. And he says, and that help remember. He says, one, first of all, you should, he says, to learn with somebody, a chacham, you should learn, learn the charifos, you should learn. It says, also, he says, L'ma'ayin b'sifr chachmi yisrael, Rabbi HaKlol, some kids, you learn klalim, general, I don't know, people do this anymore, with kitzer, short things. He says, third of all, you should be mechaven what you're reading, not just reading. He says, don't just read. It's kind of funny. We say Mashiv Ruach, just say it like 90 times. Don't do that. Think about what you're actually saying. Make simanim, we're going to get to. What's simanim? But that's something we're going to get to. But simanim is an important thing. It says, always look in one sefer. This is very interesting one also. many people, they bounce around. Maybe this is why some people, I always found the opposite of this. People use the kovetz. You never remember that. Is it the Rashba? Is it the Ramban? Is it the Chassam Sofer? Is it the Who are you reading in Yeshua? I don't know who you're reading that kovetz. But he's saying, no, you should learn in the same sefer every single time. Don't change. You should learn the same thing. He says also that the Svarim should be in a print and a beautiful font, nice to read. It's the famous Rekv Eger, beginning of Chubas Rekv Eger. But he's saying that you should be able to learn properly. Another thing is, he says you should read aloud what you're saying. Don't just read it quietly. You should read it. He said you should read with a song. This is, of course, something I'm sure we'll get into. Singing and music is something that helps you remember as well. So you should, learn with a nigun. He says you should. Interesting. He says you should also look in Sfarim that are Ksav Ashuri. Ksav Ashuri is because the kedusha of the Tzuras Oisis helps you out. He says another thing is you should read again with big print. Again, he goes, there's a lot of things. He says you shouldn't go quickly. You should learn Torah Lishma, not to be Oisher V'chaved. You should have a Kviyah Zman in your learning. You should, of course, daven. He says many things. These are what he says. And then he continues. And then he says there are 3 things that mamish help you out. And I'm sure we're going to get into this. Actually, I'm sure you're going to talk about this more. But I just want to give an overview of the Sefer. It's a fascinating Sefer. I'll link in the show's notes to an old edition. There was a new edition put out, but it's not available. I'll link that anyone can click and check it out. He says there's 3 things. First of all, we'll get into, kameyas, potions, and other sorts of, things like that. Second of all is refuah. This is something that comes from Chazal. Don't eat various things that are better for you, various things that are worse for you. I mean, this is Derech Chazal say, don't eat too many olives, you should drink olive oil. There's different things. And the third thing he says, tachbulas for mumiyos. You should make tricks and memory palace, Torah memory palace. As we're going to get to. There's various things.
Which he mamish calls al shem, right? Nikra me'itam zichroin mekaimi, al shem mekaimis. He calls that technique like zichroin mekaimi.
Right.
Palace. Yep.
Yeah, and he says you should make a shtadlus, and you should go and you should be able to do it. And he says,
over there he also quotes from the Baal Akeda and some other Rishonim.
Yeah, he quotes that Akeda. And he says also, v'davers and noidl chochach me'umas. All the Goyim know about this. Nikra me'itam zichroin mekaimi. He says, they all know about this. This is what it's called. And he says, and he says, you have to do it. And he says, therefore, here's my Itzah, and you should, I'm doing L'Shem Shamayim, you should know how to remember, you should be able to learn properly. And then he goes through the Refuah part, then he goes through the various parts, he goes through, the Kameyas, and he goes to Refuahs, he gives you an overview. And then he comes to Chazal again, and he says, Chazal, he says, he brings Chazal, what you should be doing, and what you should not. And then he goes through, just to end off with a little overview, then the Sefer again goes on, but it's not a big Sefer at all. But he says, they says before that you should find the Tachbula, and he quoted the Akeda. He says, "Lo niflo heisa mechachmenu lekim shekfar kotten luzulasim." Said they know it. Kani b'menachis. V'riisim oisay was a chartim is called mitzvus Hashem. Ram mitzvus zuz. Chor mitzvus acheres atuyba. Remember the other mitzvah is a zu. Zukrishma. The Tanakh says in brachis. Me'im is akar nishma b'shachris. Mishiyaka b'tchilas halavon. Tani idach. V'riisim oisay was a chartim. Ram mitzvus zuz. V'zachar mitzvus acheres aksuv mitzvah. Is a zu. Mitzvus klayim. Shenam elisel b'shatnes. V'samach lei gedilim taslcha. He's saying so. The Torah you see in the Gemara. One mitzvah, the other mitzvah. You remember they're putting it together, association, plays, mitzvahs, things that you're associating one with the other. And he goes on. And so, Heshy, I'll leave it to you if you want to add anything. But this is really the Sefer, a fascinating Sefer, like I was saying, this method of Loki, this method that Bidari Modena put together this Sefer to go through.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is that there's prakim and prakim. The most of the Sefer that you didn't mention is actually like a detailed instruction manual on how you use this method of Loki or the memory palace technique. And it's interesting because just today I was glancing after we spoke, and I see Perikid Beis, he has a question that I get from people all the time, especially from the more yeshiva shaylim. They say when they see these memory palace, they say, "Oh, I have to remember this palace." They say, like, by the time I remember your palace, I could have remembered a whole block daf already. Why am I wasting my time remembering your palace? I can remember the palace. And it's interesting, and he has a whole parak dedicated to that very question. He says, and he says because. Right, but at the same time that I could have taken to remember all your pictures and your palaces, I could have just remembered the old natural way. Yeah, kids remember, right? Just by rote, repeat it, I would have remembered. Why am I wasting my time with these palaces? And he goes on to say that of course it's not a good argument because if you do something by rote, eventually it's gonna wear out. But if you hear, and he's saying and he said he himself, I used to have the same question when I first learned this technique, like why am I wasting my time in this? But I learned eventually that this actually it really sticks, and it's much easier to chazer it, and it gets much deeper into your memory, and you won't forget it. So he answers that question. You could look at that in Perek Beis, and then he goes into a lot of techniques about how what kind of palaces to use, how you visualize things. He gets into literally the nitty gritty of how you use the system.
I just want to mention one more thing that he says in the first chapter, the one I said I'll link to with the English translation, but it's worth reading. And he says, we know that by the time of Rebbe, was allowed to write on Torah Shebal Peh, wrote down Mishnayos. Mishum Eis Lasas Lashem. Ki ro Ashicha Geveres. Chazal saw, Rebbe saw that we were forgetting. Kol Shekin v'Kol Shekin B'Derseinu Elu. For sure in his days, and he's writing this 17th century. Asher Tomid Holcha v'Govra b'Moed Moed. Ad ki Atob Malchusa b'Chol Mashallah. First of all, he writes beautiful Malitza, Psukim. So you see that, but he's saying now everyone forgets. V'Hein Emes, and he says Moisra Adam min Behema Oyin Kiyam Azacharon Hamayim and Advarim B'Daitel Haskim Olim Kertzoni. Memory. It's not just talk and speak. Memory. You can remember things. Ki Beladi Zel Lashav Yomel b'Seichel v'Dibur v'Chol Mailas Halimud v'Idiyah Gam Kishon HaMaisa Hayoyim Hazeh. There's no point. He continues on. You have to remember everything, and it's actually true. Someone sits and learns, and they come and they can't remember. He talks about Paiskim and trying to remember Psak, whatever. So this is something that we Dar Modena wrote. By the way, this sefer was originally published in 1612. So, and then you talked about an overview of the program, Heshy. So let's talk about Torah Memory Palace. Torah Memory Palace is basically this method, this program. You now have this program, and then you're publishing. We'll talk about the publishing kind of pamphlets, and you have a website, you have an app. You're doing a whole program based on this, based on memorization, and we're going to get more into what it is exactly. So let's dive a little bit more into Torah Memory Palace. This method is laid out, as we were just discussing. You'll flesh out the method a little bit more than what we just did.
Yes, 100%. Thanks. So, like I mentioned earlier, the foundation of the program is having a space, having your palace. Now you could have, and anyone that does this program will have multiple palaces, right? So every palace is sort of a space to remember. You could call it. I like to call it a filing cabinet that you file certain information on. In the Leba area, he keeps referring to the Nayar. He says like every palace is a Nayar that you're writing information on, right? It's actually like over here. He keeps using that lashon over and over because that's what it is. You're creating like actually writing down information in a space where you could literally go back to in your mind. So let me give you a quick overview of how we do it in Torah Memory Palace, right? So for example, and I'm going to use Maseches Megillah as an example because that's what we're doing now with the Reimagined program, and it's close to Purim, exactly. Right. So here, Nachi, I'll hand it to you so you can see what I'm showing you as well.
And for the listeners who can't see this because it's a podcast, there'll be a link in the show's notes where they can check out the website and they can check and they could go see and they could visualize this information.
And we could put a link to this PDF of
I'll link to this exact one
PDF so people can see exactly.
There'll be a link, and I'll also link to it on the WhatsApp chat for those as well can find it. But look in the show's notes, you can find it.
So exactly. So let's open up right here to the first page. You see over here the blueprint is the first page over here. This is your blueprint from Maseches Megillah. So for every has four rooms like at a very high level. On your top left, you have King Achashverosh's palace. On the top right, you have the Megillah story scene, and then on the bottom you have two additional rooms. Every room has 10 dafim. Now, as a standardized method, any memory technique that uses visualization will always tell you is have to follow a same path. And the same direction, right? And typically you find that people always recommend going left to right because when you're using visual techniques, because it's more natural for the brain, for the way the eye works the brain to go left to right. Now, so that first page is a very high blueprint of the whole Masechta. Now, on the second page, on the bottom of that page, you see a close up of King Achashverosh's palace, and over here, this is broken up into 10 parts. Every part is a daf, and that which is a filing cabinet for that daf is a unique spot for that daf, right? So if you look at the top left corner, that's where your first daf in theory would be, because you start you go left to right and top to bottom. So you start in top left corner. It's empty because there's no daf aleph, right? So you just move over one spot. You can start daf beis. Daf beis is by that area, by the base, by the home base, like as baseball. Because I'll get to the pegs in a moment, right? Every daf has a unique peg that ties to the sound that associates with the daf number, which is an additional method to connect the sugas to that daf, right? Then you move to the right. For that is your base. So daf gimel. That's like you'll see, it's built like Achashverosh's throne is built on bubble gum because gimel is gum, and the next one is dalid because dalid associates with doll, and that's over there. You have Achashverosh's puppet doll theater, and I'll stop over there because I'll just that's like an easy daf, like just to talk you through how the simonim work. So those are your bases where you're gonna that's your palace, and you use that palace as a base, and on that you encode information. You put your information on there, but that you could retrieve later, right? So now let's just stop on the dal. Yes.
And for the listeners, so again, you link and check it out. But these are kind of a color, kind of cartoony type of visual. That's what we're looking at. That type of palace. If you can visualize, that's the type of thing that we're looking at. Again, the first one was kind of a very broad overview. Then we opened it up a little bit. We looked a little bit deeper into that palace.
Okay. And these are all very professional illustrations made by top illustrators, and it's someone that I once worked with, and that when I started the program, he told me that if you want to do a program that's visual, it has to be eye candy. It has to be pleasing to the eye. People have to look at it and really, really like it, and it is that it's top notch. The quality is really top notch. Like it's and the paper is printed on. It's really nice it's enjoyable. So let's focus in on Daf Dalet Siman so you could see how the system works. Right now, for every in this program right now for Eraisa, what we're doing is we focus on 4 sugyas for every daf. We focus on 2 sugyas on Amud Aleph and 2 sugyas on Amud Beis. And the idea is that these are sort of hooks to get you into the daf. Right, like you said earlier, you're not trying to remember everything because it's like so it becomes a mishmash. It's these are hooks that everyone could easily remember. Once you remember something, you'll remember everything. Or as much as it builds out, as much work as you put into it, or if someone chazer daf more will come back to him. For someone that chazer a little less, he'll have those four sugyas or shaprakim. But the program itself initially gives you a hook for four sugyas. So let's quickly go through the 4 sugyas of Daf Dalet, right? So Daf Dalet and Aleph, the 2 sugyas we focused on. The first sugya it was a Nashim Chayavim Mikra Megillah. The second sugya of Dalet was that Gemara on the end of on Dalet and Aleph talks about that Chayav l'kreisa b'layla l'shanesa b'yoyim. That was the 2 sugyas on Aleph. The 2 sugyas on Beis is the Gemara says that Chazal gave the villagers the ability to read the Megillah early on Yud Aleph Beis Gimel because b'schash b'sakum mayim mazon for the year. Yeah. That's why they gave them. And the last Gemara talks about why you don't read Megillah on Shabbos. One reason Gemara says is because Shem Yavran and Dal Damas. Gemara says another reason is because they name Shalaniim Nesuas Megillah. The Aniyim are looking forward towards it, and they're not going to read it. So that's why Chazal said you shouldn't read it on Shabbos. So now, if you take that same file and go on to Daf Dalet, a few pages in, so you'll see that same Papadal theater, and now you'll see first on the top of the page, you see the sugyas broken out. You see the sugyas broken out. You're looking at the Hebrew version, but we have them in English as well. And if you look at the illustration, you'll see there's 4 parts to that image now, right? On the top left, you see this. It's the puppet doll theater because that's the peg to get Daf Dalet. And on the top left, you see there's girl puppets listening to the Megillah. Right, that reminds you. Nashim Chayav Mikra Megillah. You move to the right, and again, because you always go left to right, top to bottom. So Amud Aleph will always be on the upper part of the siman, right? So that's the first one is the girls listening to the Megillah. Nashim Chayav Mikra Megillah. You move to the right, you see the scenery behind the puppet show changing from night to day. So that reminds you of. On the bottom, you move down into the people watching this puppet show, right? Yeah, you see a villager carrying a bucket of water and some food. He's bringing it to the Bnei Ir, and he's getting special tickets. So that reminds you, that's why Chazal let him read those at the special times because he brought Ma'im Mazon. And towards the right, in the bottom right, you see an ani. And his eyes are popping out, like literally popping out of his sockets into the Megillah, right? So you say, a name Shalnim Nasumas the Megillah, that's why you can't read on Shabbos. And then if you turn to the back of the booklet, you'll see that same palace, and now you'll see the palace, all these simanim filled in. Like if you look at the Dalid, you'll see it's full. It's full with those simanim, and every day, like there's every daf, you have these simanim, the idea is that once you understand what each illustration means, right? And like as you look at daf Daled, okay, you go back on what was the daf Gimel again, daf Beis again. And the idea is you could quickly review it in your mind. You could review it anywhere you are, right? While you're driving, while you're walking to shul, you're walking back to shul, you're waiting for the Bal Tefillah to start Chazar Shots. You literally have it in your mind. And eventually the muscle memory becomes so strong, you could literally shoot through 10 of these daf in less than a minute, because it's so quick, because you're just looking at it and you're seeing those girl pubs. You're not seeing girl pubs, you're seeing Nashon Chavik and Megillah. And so that's the basic overview of how the sugya, how the mahalach works.
And these pamphlets, they open top to bottom like a calendar, like an old-fashioned calendar. That's how, for those, in glossy paper, the color, for those who are curious. Okay, so a lot more to dive in, but I want to actually take a step back for a second. How did the Torah Memory Palace start? You mentioned your interest from your personal background and Levaria, but how did you actually start with this program?
Yeah. So we started, I always had this, so as soon as I learned about these memory techniques, again, like as I was getting ready for law school, I was like, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, hey, if I would have known about this 15 years ago, I would have been developed Talmud Chacham by now. Like, what a shame. Like, I could have known about this, and I would have been Rash Gabag by now. And I would tell my wife, I tell my kids, I told them that one day I'm going to do this. I'll make this available. I'd love to do it in a program that would make it available to Bnei Yeshiva, to people, like to teach them this mahalach. And that was always my dream from the moment I learned about the Memory Palace technique. Fast forward 12 years later, when I'm already practicing law for 10 years, my chavrusa, I was chavrusa with Ari Berkowitz at the time. We learned FYME, and he recommended. He said, maybe we could make a memory palace, because we've always toyed with the idea. It wasn't practical. How do you make something in learning and to take that memory palace technique? For example, because in Leva Arya, that's something. If someone wants to use the memory palace technique, the Leva Arya tells you, go look at a palace, go. And then have the palace in your mind, and then think about the sugya, come up with an image, and put it in your mind on that image, right? But I want to tell someone how to do it, and it's like, how am I going to start writing on a piece of paper? Oh, visualize this kal v'chomer, visualize this thing, and that it's like an instruction booklet, just not going to go, right? But lo and behold, Ari came up with an idea. He said, "I'm going to go." He reached out to an illustrator. At the time we were learning Nazar, and he asked an illustrator to make a room of a barbershop for Nazar, and he said that's what we're going to use as the palace. And he said we'll make pictures for every sugya and put it in the palace. I was like, it's not going to work. But then the moment he got his we spoke about a couple ideas, and this day he got it back from an illustrator, I looked at it, I was like, it could really work. I was like, I was blown away, because this illustrator took a space and where you could break it out to 10 dafim, and it was mamish beautiful. We could clearly see what each sugya was and those ideas. And I was like, okay, it was crude. It was like a rough idea, but I was like, okay, let's get this to a place where we could really hand it. Now the biggest challenge I remember myself when I went with this Russian guru that I mentioned earlier, School of Phenomenal Memory. The biggest challenge of someone that wants to learn Memory Palace technique is the whole concept is very easy, right? Okay, I have a space, I'm going to put something on that space, right? But how do you visualize something, right? Something that's an esoteric idea, a conceptual idea. How do you visualize it, right? How do you visualize it? And in that program, they actually teach you various different techniques, how you could see a new word, right? How you could see a mathematical formula, how you could see a language, how you could, anything you want to remember. There's multiple ways of actually taking something that's not visual. It's not a bottle of orange juice. It's not a table, and putting it into something that you could visualize. That is the biggest hurdle to learn, right? For example, numbers, right? The biggest thing of memory is, and it comes up in learning many, many times. It comes up in in day-to-day life, people want to remember. You want to remember someone's birthday. You want to remember a yard site. You want to remember a credit card number, a phone number, right? How do you see numbers, right? You can't just visualize 1, 2, right? 23, right? Because that's all going to become mumble jumble for most people, right? Eventually, right? So the idea is that somehow everything has to become an image, right? And that is the biggest challenge for most people, learning how to do that. And I literally spent a half a year doing this program and learning how to visualize things. Now, so the beauty of Torah Memory Palace is that those hurdles are all taken away from you because you have the benefit of the TMP team. Our Simonim, the pictures are there ready for you. Meaning we already think about how you visualize a Kal V'chomer, right? How do you visualize L'Katchila B'diavad? So for example, right, L'Katchila in Torah Memory Palace is always a green light. Traffic light is L'Katchila. B'diavad is always a yellow traffic light, right? Puzzle is red, right? A Kal V'chomer is a seesaw. You have a Kal, you have a Kal on the top and a Chomer on the bottom, right? But if for someone to come up with that idea, it will take him hours and maybe he'll never think of it, right? But now you have that handed to you. So the biggest hurdle is already taken care of. The thing that you have to do is look at it and understand how it connects to the sugya and get used to the program, right? So that's how I got that. It's how initiated with that initial like crude room in Masechtas Nazir. We decided to try it with Daf Yomi at the time. This was approximately 2 years ago. We started the first Masechta we tried was Masechtas Gittin. It was similar to what you're seeing over here from Megillah, but it was a lot. It was three sugyas per daf. The setup was very different. It was not as developed as what you're seeing over here. We did that for approximately a year. It was extremely hard to keep up. It was very expensive, and it was just not coming up with the sugya with the creative content. We just couldn't do it quickly enough in a way that really to have like excellent, perfect simonim. So we stopped and pivoted to what we started now to Reimagined, which is a 2.5 blot per week program. Was much more manageable.
Do you want to just also explain for the listeners what a Reimagined is for those that might not be familiar with that?
Sure. Yeah. So Reimagined is an extremely popular program. Actually, they just had a very big funding campaign. So they're saying there's 30,000 people worldwide doing the Reimagined program. The Reimagined program is a worldwide program where every Chabura or Chavrusashaft learns the same Amud every day. There's 2.5. The program is 2.5 blot per week. So Sunday through Thursday you learn an Amud. Friday and Shabbos you chazer, and every single day Sunday you learn a new Amud and chazer the one from before. Monday you learn a new Amud, chazer the one from before, and etc. And then Shabbos, Friday and Shabbos you chazer that week's material. That's the Reimagined program. So they just started Megillah a couple of weeks ago, and the plan now is for Torah Memory Palace is to make this available along the Reimagined program. And we started with Megillah, and then after Megillah we're going to go with Tainus, and then Chagiga and etc. and move on to Nashim and the Zikin.
Right. For Daf Yomi, it's hard enough to do the daf. It's probably like people are just like, I think Daf Yomi, the theory is you do it all, you forget a lot of it, but some of it goes in. You don't just sit. Listen, obviously, I'm sure that people doing Daf Yomi, they disagree with this, but I think that's your theory, right? But Araisa, everyone wants to sit on it.
I found that with the people doing Araisa, they're all interested. Any Chavrusashaft that I met with or any shir, there are people that were very interested in hearing about it. With Daf Yomi, people was less so because the people are resigned. Most people learning Daf Yomi resigned to like, okay, I'm just learning it and I'll see it again in 7 years. Or besides for the Chidim that are living it and doing it all day.
So what's the process like for creating the Torah Memory Palace content? I mean, you spoke a little bit about it, but what's that process like?
Sure. So it starts by actually for Megillah I created these simonim. I created the ideas for the simonim that I learned through the Masechta with my chavrusa, and then once we finish the daf, we break down the daf into various sugyas or headers. I think like we're the most important parts of the sugya. There's always going to be people are going to have different opinions. Oh, why did you choose this? So you could have chosen something else. And we'll get to that in a moment. But for whatever reason, I chose a certain sugya. Now, once I have 2 sugyas per amid chosen, I think about what element of that sugya is like the easiest to visualize, something you could put into a picture, and that's what I'll put into that's what I'll actually put into the picture that will go into the palace. Once I have those ideas, I write up detailed instructions, and send it to the illustrators in Eretz Yisrael. We have excellent illustrators, Mrs. Abinson, Mrs. Minhar. These are top-notch illustrators, and the instructions for each palace, which is 10 daf, is literally 30, 40 pages of instructions, like of textual instructions. And they take these ideas and put it into images. They use their own creative ideas themselves to bring it out even more. And that's how it starts. We have the sugyas are written up by Mordechai Kaster, who actually he writes it up in Lashon Kodesh and in English as well. I get feedback kaseder. People love reading his English summaries because they're extremely clear. And it's not written in any fancy English. It uses the same type of English that like me and you are just talking to each other, and it's extremely easy to understand the sugya. So I have people that when they're doing the program, just read through the sugya even before the daf, sort of as like a preview of what's coming. And then once we get the illustrations back, we send it. We have the graphic designers that make these PDFs or these booklets that are going to be printed. And there's a video as well that goes with every daf, and with a narration of going through the sugya, and now it ties into the images.
And you have a website, you have an app. We'll talk about more of that in a little bit, but I just want to ask also, because it's coming out, you have these pamphlets. Is there any thought to make them into safer?
But as Hashem, I would love to. For example, like once Megillah is finished, I'd love to print it. It definitely it's in the works, but it's I definitely with the Yeshiva Shalom, I found that the print version is better because they're not at computers. Yeah. They don't have smartphones. It's and even for myself, which I have access to a computer. I work at a computer most of the day, but there's something to having it in your hand, especially for Shabbos and Yom Tov and Mikavin. There was someone I wanted to mention, Joe Lieberman. Joe Lieberman is also a lawyer. He's actually he is the biggest supporter of Torah Memory Palace right now. He funded Masechtas Megillah and some prior Masechtas as well. And I just, the reason why I thought about it because I sent him the print version just last week, and I texted him in the morning, "Oh, Joe, by the way, you should have gotten those the Memory Palace, the booklets yesterday." He's like, "Oh yes, I'm using it right now," and with his Gemaras. He's someone that also has access to it, but he also found, and he told me they're amazing, and really it's just easier to use when you're holding it in your hand. Interesting sidebar with how I got hooked up with Joe Lieberman. Initially, Joe's from Cedarhurst. He works in Cedarhurst, and he at one point when we literally ran out of funds and we were going to stop the program towards the beginning of Mitzia, and it was literally the day that we sort of went pencils down, and I asked the whole entire team stop working on because we don't have money to pay you anymore. Then it was like at that I saw a new sign up came up. Joe Lieberman signed up for the program, and he was already number 700 had signed up at the time. And I've never ever texted anyone that signed up. For some reason, it was an interesting name, Joe Lieberman, the Senator Joe Lieberman. I was like, hey. So I texted him, "Hey Joe, I see you signed up. Let me know if you have any questions." So Joe responds, "Oh yeah, this is an awesome program. I always thought someone should do this. Do you need any money?" I'm like, "Do you need any money?" I said, "Well, the program's over because we're out of money." And he said, "Let's talk." And long story short, Joe Lieberman is a lawyer. He went to Harvard, and he himself got into Memory Palace when he was in law school. Very similar to I did. See, and he also had this idea that someone has to do this in learnings. He was extremely excited about it, and he helped carried me through till here. And it was and just support in the gufa, so to speak. And not only that, sometimes you have someone that supports you because he believes in the program. Joe's actually doing the program and lives it, and it's very actually knows the dafim, knows the simanim. So it's just a very exciting partnership.
So he's your main supporter. Listen, it's amazing when someone steps up. A lot of these programs really require someone to really be involved financially, and also more than that, to actually be involved physically, mentally. They're actually doing the program so they can be involved and invested in it, because it's so important for these programs. As much as you have this idea, you're trying to execute it. It requires so much to actually go and to execute it, and that's definitely important. So what's unique about Torah Memory Palace?
Yeah. So the what's unique about Torah Memory Palace, and there are other great memory programs out there. What's unique about Torah Memory Palace is mainly two things. First of all, it's the Memory Palace technique. I don't think there's any other program that uses it in that's really in a true way, like the way the Levaria, any other modern Memory Palace book will describe it, where you're actually using using that concept of spatial memory to remember things. The second aspect is everything is visual. There's nothing here. If I'm working on a simon, I'll break my head for 3 days on a daf or on a sugya. How could I put this into visual image? And you'll never see like a text box or like a text bubble, like someone speaking to them, because that's there's nothing visual about that. If you see two people speaking, you have to read it to understand the context, then it's not visual, right? Everything is visual, and everything is in the space. So those are the two main, I guess, most critical points about that make Torah Memory Palace technique. You also have an advantage, that effect that as the palace comes together, for example, once you finish one room in the palace, which is 10 dafim, now you have like a joint simon for 10 dafim, right? Where one thing leads to the next automatically, and you have a hook for 40 sugyas, right? It all comes together, which is also very unique to Torah Memory Palace.
I'm sure there are listeners that are listening to this and going, all right, illustrations, you have illustrators, you have these palace, sounds cute, they'll look it up, maybe you have these, but isn't it just easier? Just learn it. Chazer again. Chazer many times. Or why do we need this? Is this just a gimmick? What's going on over here?
Yep. So and that's a great question and a fair question. Like I mentioned earlier, it's actually like a question that Levi Arya himself asks and answers. But what I will say is that but just to put another spin to that question, sometimes people ask you 4 points per daf. Come on, there's like a daf. You have a daf. When I learn a daf, there's hundreds of pieces of information. There's a Shak of a Tire, there's a Tesis, there's a Rigiv Eger. There's so much in the daf. Well, how could you tell me 4 lines? Like, where's that going to get me? That's nothing. And and my two main answers to that is, at a simple level, is that 4 points is a lot. Because if you learn 10 dafim, 20 dafim, 30 dafim, and you don't have to go back. Once you learn 10 dafim, you realize how much 40 pieces of information is. It's a lot of information. And then once that adds up, it's an entire Masechta, 2 Masechtas, you're mamish like an Oisher. It's a lot of information. That's one answer to that question. The other answer is that for someone that's really ligging in the sugya, so to speak, or someone that's actively chazering the sugya, there's so much more he's going to take out of this program. Because I spoke with a man that's in Kyle in Baltimore last week. I'm not going to mention his name because I didn't ask him for permission, but he just saw this program someplace. He called me and he told me that for him, it's not just the 4 points per daf. It's like, he chazers, obviously, and he remembers the 4 points, but he remembers everything about the daf because that's how memory works. Memory is a reflex. One thing leads to the next. If you remember one thing, you'll remember something else. Obviously, if a Baal Bas is going to learn a daf in a half hour or an hour, he's not going to remember the whole daf from this, right? He'll remember the 4 points as long as he keeps refreshing it in his mind. But for someone that does chazer, and someone that does those 4 points are going to be so much more meaningful. And it's going to if you remember 1 point, he'll remember, Tosis Kasha, he'll remember the Shak of a Tire, it'll all come back to him. That's 1 point. And to answer, and just go back to answer your question directly, why do I need this? That goes answer because it's just a lot more powerful than just chazering by rote. It's like, even if from my own experience, I remember when I was 1 year, I spent 1 year chazering Masechtas Bava Metzia over and over as a man in BMG, but I never felt like it was like, okay, like I chazered a daf a few times today. I'll come out. I would come home. What was on there? I can't. You need some. But what this program taught me is that if you have an easy hook, to get there, just to go back to your mind in an organized way. What was on Daf Lamed Beis? What was on Daf Vav? What's right here? It suddenly it all comes back to you. So those hooks are extremely important, and once you start using them, it just becomes obvious that what you were missing until then.
Yeah, I'll have to answer my question. Go back to the law school thing. I remember for the bar exam, you have to do, UB was 7 subjects, and you have those plus another 6 or 7 or 8 for the essays. And you come there. I remember I was preparing, I was using Barbary, and it came down and it was like, apologies to those who didn't do law, not lawyers, not law school. Like, what are you talking about? And it came down to it, and it was like, there's a lot of material you got to know, and they're all like this. You have to remember everything. You have to write the essay. You have to write it out. They ask you a question. You got to remember that specific area. And it was like in the beginning, it was like, well, remember I went to school and we did like a test exam, and I did fine, but it was like, At that point, there's a guy, actually a Jewish guy, John Grossman, he gives lectures on adaptive Ibrahim. I was just like the basics of each sugya, just go through the basics. And I was like, forget it. I'm not going through all the specific, all the nitty gritty. They just go through the basics, the Rashi Prakim, almost like we were saying the fourth part of that. Just go through the Rashi Prakim, and through that. First of all, you just have to remember the Rashi Prakim, but you end up remembering so much more when you just start with the Rashi Prakim, and just because you started with law school and mamish, it was like amazing when it came to the bar exam, because once you know something, even the basic, you'll end up remembering. Okay, so you have the sugya on Daf Dalet, like you're saying, you're talking about Nosham Chavis Mikriel. Oh, and you remember now, and Taisa says this. You remember every little knage once you. Not necessarily everyone, but it's easier to remember once you have like the basic compartmentalized of what's going on in the sugya. You can come down to it. So it definitely makes a lot of sense. You can use the palace. You can use the funky, cute, cartoony illustration. So, who is TMP, Torah Memory Palace? Who is it meant for?
All right. So, but that's a great question, and the answer is it's literally meant for anyone that wants to upgrade his learning or her learning, and certain not for the Gemara or whatever. But we'll get there in a moment. But I'm going to stick to the law school thing for a second, because it's one thing I keep emphasizing when I talk to people, it's not Torah Memory Palace is not about, right now we're doing it for Gemara, Megillah, we're going to do Tainis, Bez Hashem, we'll get to Yavamis, whatever we're doing. It's not about the 4 points per daf. It's about learning the technique. And these techniques are literally something you could use for anything you want to lose. I use these techniques. I'm a tax lawyer. I work at a large firm. As tax lawyers, anyone that's a tax lawyer professional knows it's all about what you know. And it's very specific information. It's not just like wishy-washy information. You have to literally know, what does this code section say? What does that code section say? And the more you know, right? It's very detailed. And I literally use. I have certain, like, a lot of tax knowledge that's built on these fundamental aspects, right? Knowing the code sections, knowing like these kind of simonim, knowing what's there, and then once you have them, you understand it better, and you could use it in practice. Now, so for example, who is it for? So we have members who are, like I mentioned before, that Kol Yungaman is a young guy in Kol. He uses it. He's clearly a lamdan. He knows how to learn. Doesn't need help. Doesn't need help with anything. He's being successful. But this is something that's helping, using as a tool for easy recall. Right? There's Baal Batim that are using it, finding it very, very helpful. There's a 70-year-old a man that's doing Masechus Megillah. He had a very hard time with the first few dafim, but now he made it through daf Yubez. He's like, it's much easier now. I love it. It clicked, and it's sort of, and sometimes you find over the years, I've spoken to people that as they get older, they find that memory is not like it used to be, right? It's like suddenly they're forgetting names, they're forgetting things, and these are people that always thought they had a great memory, and somebody that's not working. And I had some people that have used this program, so you're using your mind in a different way. And it's, you could, even if you're starting to forget your typical mahalch, this is going to help you remember. Now, and here's something that I'm very passionate about is for bachrim or kids that are not being successful in the regular typical mahalach. For example, there's a friend of mine has a yeshiva for bachrim that are struggling. They happen to be learning Masechus Megillah now. And I gave him a stack of booklets. He's doing it with his boys, and they love it. They're just starting. I don't know how successful they're going to be, but they're really taking to it, because this is suddenly like a boy that's thought, I don't remember anything. Right? Suddenly now he sees, I could use my mind a different way. I could remember. So the short answer is that it's literally for anyone, and every person takes it in a different way. Some people open it up. It's just the most natural thing to them. Oh wow, they could finish it. There's I spoke to the Hasidic guy in Lakewood in from Williamsburg like a couple weeks ago. He went through when the first time he saw it, he finished the whole palace 10 dafim in an hour or two, and he remembered all 40 sugyas in 2 hours, which is amazing. And he was flying high, and he said, "Oh, we have to get this all over Williamsburg. Let's go." And some people struggle in the beginning; it's harder, but eventually it does click, and it becomes quicker. So it's literally for anyone that's looking to upgrade their way to learn. And one other point I would make is that somebody feels, oh, I'm not learning Masechtas Megillah now. Why should I do this? And the idea is it's not Masechtas Megillah. Masechtas Megillah, I think Masechtas Megillah is an excellent opportunity for anyone to do it because these sugyas are easy. Everyone, like most people, learn Masechtas Megillah at some point. So even if you're not learning it now, you could go through these dafim and go through the headers and stand sugyas and then see how the memory technique works, and you could use it for your own limud, right? It's just a way. It's more than the sugyas you're learning here. It's more about the actual learning the technique.
So we mentioned before, you mentioning here the print. I want to talk more about the print form, and also you mentioned the website, the app. What are the various forms that listeners can access then? And I'll put all this information in the show's notes in the WhatsApp chat.
Yep. So there's you could go to torahmemory.com is our website. There's you could sign up. It's on the website and the app. It's free. You could sign up for every 10 daf is sort of its own palace, it's like course. Once you sign up for it, you'll have access to it. It's broken up into different dafim. Every daf has a PDF of that daf's material. There's an ebook that's more like animated, like the things move a little bit. And then there's a video. There are interactive activities on the website. For example, drag and drop, where you actually you have the palace and you have 40 buttons. Suppose you have to drag the sugya, and this sort of reinforces the memory, to make sure and test yourself. Do I actually know it? Right. That's another thing. And we have quizzes. Right. So it's like there's anyone that does it. By the time they finish, they'll see if it works because you test yourself often. Do I know exactly what's on what daf? And you can't fool yourself. Either you know it or you don't. And if you don't know it, just go over another time. Chances are you will know it. And then so that's on the website. It's also there's on Apple, on the Apple Store, and in Google Play there's an app. It's called Torah Memory Palace. You can access the same content on the app. Some of the activities are better on a computer because you need a bigger screen, but for most things, for the videos and for the ebooks, you could do it on your phone. You could for the print editions, you could, if somebody wants to have it in print, the PDF files are available in color. You could go print it in color, or you could sign up for $36. You get it mailed to you. These print editions, it's a lot nicer than printing it on your own printer. You can't compare it. It's bigger. It's better paper. Like the actual palace is double-sided. You're not going to be able to do that on your own printer, but that's another way, Malach. And I think I always encourage people to actually get the print edition because it's just you have it on Shabbos, and Shabbos is always the best time to chazer. And
that's a one-time $36. That's a monthly.
It's a monthly donation. Yeah, it's a monthly donation, right? To help us get paid, and then you sort of get it as a gift.
So for those that have questions or want to help support the project, how can they reach out?
You could email us at info@torahmemory.com or heshy@torahmemory.com. Info@torahmemory.com is better. If somebody wants to text me, they can text me at 732-557-1491, and I'll be happy to respond. I'm always happy as long as I have time. I do work full time as a lawyer, so but I'll always make time to speak about the program to anyone that's interested, just because I'm passionate about it.
Definitely hear that.
Yeah.
On the podcast. So, okay, listen, I'll put all that information in the show notes. I'll put it on the WhatsApp chat. Anyone that is interested, anyone can reach out through me. I'm happy to put them in touch with you, Heshy, if anyone that's interested and can want to see. And hopefully, I do hope, we said before, I asked you about before, I do hope that you'll print this into a safer. I think it'll be really nice. It reminds me of those picture mishnayos, but those are not in color. And I know color is very expensive to print on. You're going to do a print like that, so maybe someone will step up and sponsor a safer, because I think on Megillah, you have these, it's very nice. I think it'll be really nice as a printed volume. I think it'll be very helpful for people. Like I said, Megillah is something very geshmak. Many people learn it before Purim every year. and it's a lot of fun. So.
I'm actually, we do have Masechtas Megillah is going to be the material is all going to be finished later this week. I am considering putting it in one big booklet, not hardcover, soft cover booklet.
Yeah,
and try to get into the stores before Purim. But that's I
think there'll be a real interest, and if there is, listeners, you'll find out about it on the WhatsApp chat. It'll be posted about it even after the podcast airs because new Sefer will put it out. So. Hope everyone found this interesting and enlightening, something a little different, but about a Sefer, and also Lev Aryeh, which I'll link to in the notes as well. Everyone can check that out. So thank you, Heshy, for joining me to discuss Torah Memory Palace.
Okay, thank you. Cult of